of dyeing tools. We have the natural dyeing journal, where we're going to write kind of the different amounts that we use during the process. There's a thermometer, there are tongs, rubber gloves, measuring spoons, the whisk, liquid measuring cup, of course socks, because that's what we're going to dye on today. You can buy fresh new socks, but you can also use socks you already have that you've been wearing that you want to make a new color or refresh a little bit. A timer, scale. Now the things that are different would include this, a sieve. We're going to use this with the wheat bran. And then we're going to use madder, natural dyeing extract, the mordant, which is aluminum acetate. The scour we're going to use today is soda ash. The dye and the mordant can both be found online. They can also be found at A Verb for Keeping Warm. And the soda ash you can find at the hardware store. It's also known as washing soda. And the wheat bran I get at the grocery store. And then of course a pot and a lid and a bucket. Last, you're going to need access to water and a sink, as well as a heat source like a stove. Our first step is to take the socks and to weigh them. So I'm going to set those on the scale. They come out to 66 grams. So I'm writing this in my dye journal. I've already started the project. I wrote socks for Adrian. And the fiber content is 100% cotton. In the studio, for every 100 grams of goods that we are scouring, we use 1 1/4 teaspoons of soda ash. Today, the weight of our socks, 66 grams, is about half of that. So I'm going to do half of the amount I use in the studio, which will be 3/4 of a teaspoon. There we have about 3/4 of a teaspoon. I've put a 1/4 cup of very hot water in the liquid measuring cup. And now I'm going to use my whisk to dissolve the soda ash. In my pot full of water, I'm going to add the dissolved soda ash. This water is tap water. I didn't measure the water. I put enough in here so the socks could float freely. From here, I'm going to put the socks in. Just kind of push them underwater a little bit. And then I'm going to come back to my journal and make sure I write the type of scour that I used, which is soda ash. And I'm going to use the amount in there as well. From here, put this pot on the stove and turn the heat up, and you want to heat it to 180 degrees. It's very important at this time to keep the pot on the stove at 180 degrees for an hour. That is what's going to help remove the waxes that are in the cotton. You could even keep it on heat for 2 hours and it wouldn't hurt it. While the socks are heating, use your tongs and rotate the socks in the pot. Then, once you've had the socks overheat for at least the hour, you turn off the heat and let the socks come down to room temperature. I've scoured the goods. I let them come down to room temperature. I have a bucket with lukewarm water in it. It's clean water, and I'm going to rinse the socks in that clean water and let them sit and hang out here for a moment while I prepare the mordant. The mordant I'm going to use today is aluminum acetate. Why I use this mordant specifically for cellulose is because it gives the clearest colors, and the colors that come have the most saturation, as well as it has really great light fastness properties. In the studio, I use 2 teaspoons to every 100 grams of fiber that I'm dyeing. Since we're working with 66 grams today, I'm going to use about half that amount, so 1 teaspoon. I've added a 1/4 cup of very hot water to my liquid measuring cup. Take my whisk and make sure that this is fully dissolved. And then I'm going to pour it into this pot of water. Again, just like scouring, I did not measure the water I put in here. I put the amount of water in here where I thought the socks could float freely. Set those in, duck them under water. The water in this pot though is very hot tap water. I'm going to put a lid on here to keep the pot warm. Unlike the silk scarf class, when we were Mordanting, the cotton socks are going to go in this pot and they do not need to be brought up to heat. Instead, it's just going to sit on the counter in this pot for the next 2 hours. It can sit in the pot for up to 24 hours, and the longer it stays in the pot, the better for light fastness. Another unique part of working with aluminum acetate as your mordant and cotton is that we have this kind of added step where we make a bath. I have wheat bran and I've measured it into 1 cup. I've taken my pot to use as a vessel and I've put 10 cups of very hot tap water in here. I'm going to pour the wheat bran into there and using your whisk to combine the wheat bran with the water. Let this sit for 5 minutes. The reason I use a wheat bran bath is when I use aluminum acetate as the mordant, what I want to do is remove any excess mordant that are on the socks, and the wheat bran bath does that. That way, when I go to dye, the dye adheres to the mordant and to the sock instead of to the excess mordant that I'm going to wash off in this pot. While I wait for the wheat bran bath, I'm going to record my information in the dye journal. So I'll put down wheat bran and 10 cups of water, 1 cup of wheat bran. So I just poured the wheat bran bath through the sieve. I'm gonna try to get as much water out of that as possible. Now I'm going to take my Mordanton socks and put them in this hot wheat bran bath. I'm going to move them around really well so the wheat bran bath can really cover them. I really like to use wheat bran on knit fabric, specifically. Okay, so from here we're going to proceed to the dyeing process. Now we get to the fun part, playing with color. I put my apron on. In my book, I've created a shade card for cellulose-based fibers. It's broken down into linen and cotton. And then the next step it's broken down to is back to that bath that we just did. So we just did wheat bran, but there is another option, which is a bath made with chalk. And these 2 baths can influence the color. As you can see here with cochineal, the pink used here because of the chalk bath is a little bit more vibrant and saturated than the pink you see with the wheat bran bath. Today we're going to use Madder. Adrienne loves red. She's going to have these adorable little red socks. So looking at these a little bit closer, you can see this one was made with wheat bran, this one was made with the chalk bath, and you can see a slight differentiation in color. This one's a little bit more dusty, this one a little bit more clear. And then I also went and pulled the linen samples. So you can see the cotton versus the linen here and here and here. Cotton and linen. I really like to use the wheat bran bath when I work with knit fabrics. The reason why I say that versus the chalk bath is because the chalk is very, very fine and it has a slightly higher pH. It makes it a little bit more astringent. So when I work with knit fabric and I use the chalk bath, I can really feel the difference in the texture of the fabric. When it comes to wovens, I enjoy using both the wheat bran bath and the chalk bath. One of the kind of tricky things about working with cotton is that it's not quite as responsive to the changes in dye as silk and wool are. For this pair of socks, I used Weld, and then for this pair of socks, I used Madder with the wheat bran bath, of course. But then what I did was I made a new dye pot, and I combined the Madder and the Weld. I put these socks in, so they're slightly orange. And then, kind of 30 minutes into the dyeing process of these, I added a brand new pair of white socks, and so this soaked up the rest of the remaining dye in the dye bath, so they're slightly lighter. Then, these were cooking still at the same time, and 30 minutes into this dye bath, I added these socks. That's why they're slightly pink. And then finally I have the socks over here, which are made with cochineal. I encourage you to go to the shade card and to combine different dyes that you see on there, all the different colors coming together, making new colors. Also, in that kind of pot that I'm using today, you can probably fit at least 2, if not 3 pair of socks in there. So you could essentially build 3 shades of color and 3 pair of socks in one pot. We're gonna go for a shade close to this, though because my socks are more like 60 grams instead of 100 grams, which is how I achieved this shade, I'm going to use half the amount. So about a half teaspoon of madder. I put about a 1/4 cup of very hot water in my liquid measuring cup. Take my whisk and dissolve this, and then add it to this pot of water. The water in this pot is tap water, lukewarm. There are 8 cups of it in here. In the dyeing process, I have to pay attention to how much water is in the pot. The more water there's in the pot, the lighter the color will come out. Okay. Then I'm adding the mordanted socks. From here, I'm going to put this on the stove, turn up the heat, and I'm going to heat it to 200 degrees for about 1 hour. Again, if you want to leave it on a little bit longer, to 1.5 hours or 2 hours, it will only make the socks more light fast. I'm going to write down the amount of dye I used, which was a half teaspoon, and the dye madder extract. From here, I'm going to take the pot, I'm going to put it on the stove, turn the heat on to high, and I'm going to heat this up to 200 degrees for 1 hour. It's okay to leave this on for even 1.5 hours to 2 hours. The longer you keep it on, the more light fastness this will have. In addition to that, right now the madder and the water in here looks very brown, very orange. As it hits the heat and the heat warms up the pot, this color is going to go red. It's a really amazing thing to kind of watch happen. While this is cooking, about every 10 minutes, sometimes even 5, I continuously turn this to make sure that the heat is hitting this evenly and the red is as evenly distributed as possible across the socks. Once I've heated it completely for 1 hour and I'm done heating it, then I turn off the heat, and at that point I let the goods come down to room temperature, and then I start the washing process. Okay, we have dyed the socks. And now I'll try to squeeze out as much dye bath as possible. And I'm going to move on to rinsing them. So I have a bucket here full of cool water, and I'm going to wash out any extra dye. The great thing about working with cotton, these socks are an example, are that I can release the excess dye into this bucket, but then I can throw these into my washing machine with a load of laundry. So I would just put this with light colors, and doesn't matter what temperature you wash it on, and that will wash out any excess dye, and then you can wear them. Here we have the newly dyed wet socks. So there's so many opportunities and options for you to work with natural dyes, as we can see here from this collection. We have the wet socks we did today. These are the socks that I did in my studio in the same process, except halfway through I added these socks in the dyeing process. So you have 2 shades from 1 pot. So going forward, you could always add more socks to your pot and get more shades. You can work with other dyes from the shade card. You can combine dyes together to get new colors. So many possibilities. Now that you know the basics of natural dyeing, both on protein-based fibers like the silk scarf and cellulose-based fibers like cotton socks, there are so many opportunities for you to explore. You can continue to look at the shade card and pull dyes off of it in order to get more colors. You can combine dyes together. I am so excited for you to delve deeper into your natural dyeing practice.